He survived the fire, but survival was just the beginning. Zubair became the voice of the forgotten. But in a world still burning, speaking out can cost everything. Now, the boy who once told stories under canvas tent must decide. Will he protect the fragile hope he's built? Or risk it all to light the way for others? The day came when Zubair had to choose. A foundation offered him a full scholarship, a chance to study storytelling, trauma recovery, and digital media abroad. To build tools that could help not just Camp 43, but camps across the continent. He said no at first, because living felt like betrayal. He had promised to stay, promised to hold the line, promised to keep telling the stories. But Lamia, wise as their mother, once asked him a question that cracked his resolve. What if staying small is another kind of erasure? That night, he dreamt of Auntie Rina. She stood in the ashes again, handing him a book that wasn't burned. Go, she said, not away, but forward. And so he left, not with pride, but with purpose. He encased the baobab tree, left copies of his journals, promised the children to write back. When the truck rolled past the edge of the camp, he didn't look back, because he knew the roots would hold. The city, the real world, was a shock to his system. Glass buildings, fast food, street lights that obeyed rules, people who asked questions but didn't wait for answers. He lived in a shared flat with students from 10 different countries. They all had different traumas, different wars, different kinds of silence. He struggled with language, with technology, with the guilt of sleeping on a mattress when children in Camp 43 still slept on mats. But he learned. He studied trauma therapy, oral traditions, digital storytelling, refugee policy. He presented at forums, held workshops. Once he was invited to the UN, and when they gave him 5 minutes to speak, he used to tell the story of a girl who wrote poems on rice sacks. After the applause, one delegate from South America approached him and whispered, "I have a sack like that in my kitchen." The world wasn't as big as he thought. In his second year, Zubair created Light, Remembered, a platform that trained displaced youths in storytelling and advocacy. He partnered with camps in Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, Myanmar. They shared curriculum, created joint poetry anthologies, built a multilingual podcast called Ashes to Anthem. He wasn't alone anymore. There were others, young, bruised, brilliant, carrying torches in their corners of darkness. They called themselves the Quiet Rebels. Together, they weren't quiet for long. Zubair came back at 23. Camp 43 wasn't on most maps, but it had changed. There was a mirror of a boy holding a broken moon, a signboard in front of the library that read, "Where silence ends, we begin." Children ran to him. Some recognized his face from videos. Others only knew his name from bedtime stories. He hugged Lamia first. Then Hawa, now teaching painting. Kemi, now a published poet. The boy who once carved birds, now building real ones from thin and wires that flew. Zubair stood under the bamboo and said nothing. He didn't need to. The roots had held. In the following months, Zubair platform launched an initiative that influenced policy in 3 nations. His team developed a mobile app to collect anonymous testimonies from IDP and refugee camps. One testimony from a girl in Chad triggered an international investigation into child trafficking. Another helped a missing boy find his family. Zubair didn't claim credit. He just kept building bridges. Stories aren't just survivor. He told the gathering of African youth, they are blueprints for justice. Years passed. Zubair became a name in rooms he never imagined entering. But he never forgot where his voice was born. He still told the story of the moon, still whispered names over microphones, still sat in the dirt with children when he could. One day, during a storytelling workshop in a refugee camp in South Sudan, a girl stood up and said, "I want to be like you. I want to make people remember." Zubair smiled and handed her his pen. "You already are," he said. "Now telling your story." Zubair's book, even in ashes, wasn't meant to be a bestseller. It was a gift, a stitched offering of memory and truth. But the world did treat it that way. Within months, it became a voice for the voiceless, translated into 10 languages, read in refugee classrooms, policy halls, and underground clubs alike. On TikTok, young people read passages over candlelight. At UN panels, diplomats quoted his closing line. Still, Zubair remained grounded. He remembered standing barefoot on red dirt, telling a story about a moon that forgot how to shine. Now his name echoed in places he never visited, in voices he would never meet. But fame wasn't fuel. Memory was. And there were still too many forgotten names. With grants and grassroots support, Zubair opened his biggest dream yet, the Firefly Academy. Located on the edge of the Sahel, it wasn't just a school, it was a sanctuary. Not brick and mortar grandeur, just wide courtyards, open-air classrooms, a circular library built from the recycled mud bricks, and a banyan tree at the center that students called the listening tree. Here, former child soldiers sat beside poets. Survivors of trafficking learned digital filmmaking. Girls with burn scars read aloud. Boys who once forgot how to cry painted mirrors on cement. They studied literature, policy, healing, history, but always true stories. Zubair taught the first class himself. "Welcome," he said, standing barefoot on the chalked mark floor. "This is not a school that saves you. It reminds you that you were never broken to begin with." And the children believed him because his scars matched theirs. The girl who spoke in ash, her name was Noura. She didn't talk much. At 14, she arrived at the Firefly Academy, carrying only a small bag of clothes and a folded newspaper article about Zubair. She had survived a mass adoption. She didn't cry, didn't laugh, but she watched everything. At first, Zubair didn't push. But one day, during a creative writing session, she stood up, silent. Then, with trembling hands, began drawing something in charcoal across the floor. It was a girl standing in fire. And below one line, "Even the ash has a voice." That was all. The next day, she spoke slowly, carefully. Her story wasn't linear. It bled, paused, backtracked. But it reached every corner of that classroom. And by the end, another boy stood and whispered, "Me too." That's how the circle of echoes was born. A student-led healing group that helped each other speak in stories instead of shame. One morning, while sorting through old letters sent to Camp 43, Zubair found an envelope marked, "To the boy who told the moon to shine again." It was dated 7 years earlier. Inside a short note, "I don't know your name. I only heard your story on the radio, but I needed you to know. Your words stopped me from drinking poison. You reminded me that even silence can bloom. If you're still alive, thank you. If not, I will keep telling your story." No name, no return address, just the truth, folded neatly, as if handled with reverence. Zubair wept for the first time in a long time. Because sometimes, even if your story doesn't find the world right away, it still finds someone. Zubair had never called anyone Baba since his father died. But when Lamia's husband passed suddenly from an illness, Zubair moved in briefly to help raise their son, Idris. Idris was only 3, curious, full of questions. He once asked Zubair, "Where do lost people go when they leave?" Zubair knelt down, touched the boy's chest. "Right here." They plant gardens inside us. Every time we laugh or tell a story, they grow. Years later, Idris would paint that moment into a mirror. Zubair kneeling, a garden blooming from a boy's chest. For Zubair, it was the closest he'd come to a fatherhood. And it was enough. Hope doesn't stop war. One evening, as Zubair was preparing a keynote for a conference on digital trauma healing, he received a call. A neighboring camp had been attacked. 30 people killed, dozens missing. Fire destroyed half the school library. One of the missing, Kemi, the girl who once wrote poems on rice sacks. Zubair dropped everything. He didn't just send aid. He drove there, slept in the rubble, helped dig through ash, helped survivor write down what happened. Not for social media, but for memory. When someone asked him, "Why do you still come back?" he answered, "Because if I don't, the story dies with them." Zubair had always avoided politics. But after the attack, he worked with advocates to draft legislation across multiple countries that recognize trauma-informed storytelling as a human right, especially in camps and displacement zones. It became known as the Storytellers Act. It mandated safe storytelling space in IDP, refugee camps, legal support for survivors who shared testimonies, funding for art-based healing initiatives. It passed in 3 nations. 2 others followed. Zubair never stood at the podium. He let others speak. Because that was always the point. Not to be the voice, but to make space for many. On the 10th anniversary of Auntie Rina's disappearance, the Firefly Academy held a special gathering. Zubair told her favorite story, the moon that forgot how to shine. But this time, when he reached the end, he paused. Then asked the student, if the moon could speak back, what would it ask? Hands rose. Voices followed. Why did you wait so long? Why did you stop looking? Why don't you believe in yourself? The room became a storm of possibility. By the end, one girl stood and whispered, maybe the moon never forgot. Maybe we stopped believing it could come back. And Zubair smiled, because the story no longer belonged to him. Years later, Zubair stood at the site where Camp 43 once stood. It had been decommissioned, families resettled, tents removed, but in its place, something else rose. A cultural center, a storytelling garden, a fire circle that never went cold. He knelt in the dirt and placed 3 stones, one for his parents, one for Auntie Rina, one for the boy he used to be. Then he lit a small flame and whispered, grow. A new student at the Firefly Academy asked Zubair, are you the founder? Zubair shook his head. No, I'm just the first one who dared to tell the story out loud. On his 40th birthday, Zubair sat on a rooftop with his niece and nephew. They asked, "Will you ever stop telling the story of the moon?" He laughed. "No, but maybe one day someone else will tell it better." Then he looked at the stars. Thousands of them. Everyone a story still waiting to be told. Zubair was no longer just a boy from Camp 43. He was now a bridge between brokenness and rebuilding, silence and song. At the Firefly Academy, he watched a new generation tell stories he'd never imagined. They didn't need him to light the fire anymore. They had become flames of their own. One evening, under a sky stitched with stars, a child asked, "Will you ever stop telling the story of the moon?" Zubair smiled. "No, but maybe one day someone else will tell it better." As he walked away from the circle, their voices rose. A chorus of truth, pain, poetry, and power. He realized the greatest story he'd ever told was helping others believe in their own. Legacy is not the fire we carry, it's the fire we leave behind.